Hi, I'm Janine, and this is Outside the Box. Standing by to join me is Daniel Maté, award-winning musical theater songwriter, playwright, educator, and mental chiropractor, which I'm really curious to dive into. He has recently co-authored a couple books with his father, Dr. Gabor Maté, Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Parents and Their Adult Children, as well as The Myth of Normal. And we are speaking right now. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I should clarify that the Hello Again book hasn't been written yet. It's
Oh,
next in the queue. Myth of
oh, it
Normal,
is.
Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture is now out everywhere books are
Okay.
sold. We, as soon as the publicity and the excitement from the release of that book dies down, then we'll get some time to finally write the Hello
Okay.
Again book, which is based on a workshop we have been doing for 6 years. So it's a little convoluted, but
Okay.
those are the facts.
Well, that's great. And I saw a talk you just did in Rhinebeck, New York, which I love
Yeah,
that area.
yeah.
How was that? Have you done many events with your father in years past?
Yeah, so we've been doing that workshop for longer than we've been co-writing The Myth of Normal. Hello Again started in 2016 in Vancouver. So far, we've done it in, I guess, 4 different locations: Vancouver, Toronto, New York City, and upstate New York. And we're getting interest in doing it in various other locations, even other countries. And as we write this next book, it'll be, I think, really helpful to us and hopefully helpful to people wherever we go to bring this material to different places, because of course cultures differ. It's a different vibe in every place, but
Yes.
it does seem to be a pretty universal theme, this tricky, challenging, sometimes very difficult task of updating a relationship that is so rooted in the past.
Yes.
And how do you possibly have an adult relationship between two people who, when they met, couldn't have been farther apart on the poles of maturity, responsibility, humanness, really?
Yes.
And one of them was completely responsible for the other, and the other one was being conditioned by the other one's nervous system. I mean, it's a miracle that we can even coexist. And
Exactly.
so I think it does seem to be something that no matter where we go or who we talk to, when we tell people we're doing this workshop or writing this book, they're like, oh my God, I need that. And I
Where do
didn't
I sign
realize I
up?
needed it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I feel like it's very timely, especially in the past few years where uh, adult children have had possibly to move back home or they have reconnected with their parents. Maybe they were estranged. There's been a lot of reconnection with people you were disconnected from.
I think that's true, but I think the opposite may also be true for some people, which is that because we haven't been able to visit each other and
Hmm.
spend Christmas or Thanksgiving or Passover or birthdays together, for some families where they were on the verge of estrangement or things were tenuous at best or it was stressful, for some people, and people may not want to admit it publicly, but there's been a sense of relief, like, oh my God, I have an excuse not to have to interact with these people. And then
Definitely.
you may love them, but
Yeah,
the fact is, this is a relationship that can be viscerally stressful despite everyone's best intentions.
definitely.
But either way, I think it's highlighted, whether you're brought back into closer contact with people or you're sort of separated from them, it's going to bring you face to face with what you're carrying from this relationship and what the challenges are, and maybe the way that the quality of this relationship, or at least your relationship to the relationship, affects the rest of your life. It's not an isolated, you can't really compartmentalize this one. It does tend to bleed over into every aspect of a person's life if there's something incomplete in the relationship, if we're not at ease with it, if we haven't reconciled, whether it's reconciling with each other or, even more important,
Yourself.
reconciling ourselves with the way it is and the way it has been, and then maybe having the opportunity to say, okay, what else might be possible?
Yes. What has it been like doing this with your dad? I mean, were you always close growing up, or did you have your moments where you felt very disconnected?
Oh, I think we were too close for comfort. We were too close for my comfort. My parents
Mhm.
didn't have good sense of interpersonal boundaries or differentiation. They wanted, I'll just speak for myself. I've got two
Okay.
siblings, but as my dad says, no two siblings have the same two parents because of a whole bunch of different factors. For
Yes.
me, I was the firstborn, so I think I carried a expectations and their mistaken assumptions about what it means to be parents. Their inability to see me as a separate creature, uh, their inability to see me except through their own filters, which
Mhm.
meant that they over approved of certain parts of me and they under approved of other parts of me, which goes against what every child needs. They're both very intense, dominant personalities, and I looked up to them both, and they commanded a lot of respect. But they sort of, as Hamlet said, I'm too much in the sun, SUN and SON, that there was a kind of, it was too, the rays of the parental celestial body were a little too intense for me. And so a big part of my identity was forged around them, whether it was pleasing them or resisting them.
Mhm.
And I even said to my dad when I was, I think, 10 years old, I don't know where you end and I begin.
10 years old?
Something like that. Yeah. I was that kid. I was a very precocious, self-expressed, self-aware kid. But even that is laced with me. I mean, you could say, oh, that's such a gift. But even for me, even that's laced with a kind of tragedy, because I didn't get to just be a kid. I was bright,
Mhm.
but my bright little brain had to work way too hard to keep up with a situation that wasn't able to slow down and just meet me at my level. So all of which, to answer your question, were we close? Yes, but in many ways, not in ways that were healthy. And then of course there were healthy aspects of closeness, playfulness, a shared love of words. My dad's often said that he's never been able to relate to babies. He was always impatiently waiting for his kids to gain language so he could relate to them. And
Wow.
once I did, there was a lot of joy in storytelling and verbal play and things like that. Certainly close, but it didn't make for a stable transition into an adult relationship, because as his work elucidates, there's these competing drives in every human being. One is for attachment, which predominates early in our lives, attachment
Mhm.
to the parenting figures. And then later, what emerges is a deep need for authenticity, becoming ourselves. And those are often in conflict in various ways. And so as I became a grown-up, I found myself increasingly confused by and feeling constrained by my relationship with my parents.
What
So
about a
doing this
third?
work,
Excuse me. What about a
yeah,
third? Approval from your parents.
oh, 100%, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Approval, but also distrusting the approval of my parents, because
Mhm.
I always experienced it as conditional. It was, or I didn't trust it. There was something behind it. There's something they wanted from me,
Yeah.
or at least that was my perception, which I think at times was accurate.
Yes.
Um, but what it meant was that I wasn't able to just trust praise or trust acknowledgement. I was insatiable. I always needed more and more and more because it never satisfied.
Mhm.
And then that connects to a kind of distrust of myself and of my own talents and of my own genius and gifts and all that, because it's all tainted with tryhardism, trying to get something from it and for it, as opposed to just letting it, as opposed to channeling the infinite or whatever creativity is
Yes.
supposed to be.
Yes.
So that relationship is the site of so much confusion for people, because it is the relationship that taught them what life is like.
Mhm.
Literally, that's
Yes.
the relationship that oriented them to this world. It's like, what is your tour? Welcome to the world. We're going to show you the ropes. Well, the ropes are often very confusing.
Yes.
So then again, the act of trying to sort out that relationship and come into the present. But of course, you can't make that the end all and be all of your life either, because some people's parents aren't going to be up for that, and some people just don't want to be in relationship with their parents. And moreover, the fact is, you're not a kid anymore. You don't need them in the way you did. So in
Right.
a way, you have to sort your own relationship with the relationship out on your own, and then you
Yes.
can bring that and ask, okay, proactively as an adult, now that I have agency in the matter, since I never had any choice as to whether or not to be born to these people, now I do have a choice, and I can be in a relationship with them or not, just like anyone else in the world. And if I'm going to be in a relationship with them, how do I want it to be?
Yes. What's it going to look like?
What's it going to look like, given that I actually have some say?
Mhm.
And the good news and bad news about that is that now I have some responsibility in the matter too.
Right.
I can't just sit in my victim place and be like, you're making it impossible. No,
Yes.
the trade off of getting to have a choice is getting to have responsibility. And that's a good thing ultimately, but there's a big part of us, I think, that resists that. Certainly me.
Yes. So when did you know you wanted to be a songwriter and a playwright? And was that hard because maybe at times you were filled with this negative self-talk?
Oh God, yeah. Um, I didn't let myself know it until my late 20s. The thing is, it was obvious to anyone who knew me because I had done as much theater and music as I could, but always on the margins of my life. So a perfect example was my undergraduate education at McGill University in Montreal. I had declared my major on my first day there because I was given a full year of scholarship, meaning I could just start second year the first day I got there. And I chose psychology. Now, my dad was not an author writing about psychology at the time. He was just a doctor. But of
Oh,
course, psychology was a big topic in our house. And I was starting to want to really figure myself out. And I was hoping for a humanistic approach to psychology. I didn't get it. I got a very pseudo-scientific one, as often happens in many universities. But I didn't quit it. In fact, I did the honors program and I was kind of miserable, or at best, I was kind of cynically grimly cocky because I was excelling at it with one brain cell tied behind my back. Like everyone else was working so hard and I could just do it. But how I kept myself sane, I acted a lot on campus. I was a more
oh,
active male actor on campus than any of the other guys, including guys who were in the drama program. I was also starting to write songs. I was playing guitar. I was kind of wanting to be an Ani DeFranco style singer-songwriter,
mhm.
divulging my, my views on the world and my inner
And your angst.
contradictions through song and my angst.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But of course, the premise of that was also flawed. I thought that studying psychology was going to help me sort myself out. And I thought that writing songs about myself and sharing them with people was going to help me sort them out. It's not quite how it works. You have to do it for some other reason,
Yes,
than just wanting, therapy.
yes.
Um, so I ended up dropping out of McGill. I bottomed out at a certain point, and I was excelling, but I couldn't. The contradictions were just too vast,
Hmm.
and I had a kind of a mental breakdown. And I left
Wow.
university. I ended up finishing the degree back in BC, but just kind of perfunctorily. And then I spent my 20s really underachieving, continuing to write songs. I recorded an album, and which I did nothing with. It stayed in boxes in my parents' basement. How symbolic is that? Uh,
Very.
and there was a song at the center of the album directed at my parents, demanding my emancipation from them. Right. Good luck with that. Right. As if they're the ones who are going to give me my freedom. It's a contradiction in terms. So it was
Yes.
all just looking back. It's too poetic. It's too obvious. It's a little on the nose. It's like, who wrote this? But I worked a lot of odd jobs. I sold Persian carpets. I delivered a Persian rug to Sarah McLaughlin's house in North
Wow.
Vancouver. I delivered organic groceries. And then finally, in my late 20s, something got through to me. I did a personal development course that showed me for the first time experientially that a big part of what I was suffering about was completely made up in my head. Not that it
Interesting.
didn't, not that it was like, not that there weren't reasons that I had made that up,
Hmm.
but that I was suffering inside of a story about myself, and a very limited one, a very upsetting one. And that it was actually optional, that I could start to again have choice, which means I'm responsible for the choice now that I know.
Hmm.
And what turned out to happen, just to bring it full circle to the relationship with the adult relationship with parents, is that for years, my mom had been trying to say to me, Daniel, you're so freaking talented and passionate about the creative arts. What are you doing? And when she would say that, I would automatically hear, what's wrong with you? When are you going to shape up and conform and have a profession and join the adult world and stop disappointing me? That's what I heard.
Wow. That's what
Now
you heard.
I probably had reasons for hearing it that way, but they were long ago reasons.
Hmm.
They were reasons reminiscent of a bad day when I was 6 or something. You know what I'm saying? They weren't
Hmm.
happening in the present moment. And after having done this course, I just had a bit more mental suppleness. And so when one day we were taking a walk and she said something like that, and the retort, because we'd always have a fight when that started. So the retort was like halfway up my throat, like it was about to come out. And I stopped myself, which I'd never done before. I said, Mom, could you please repeat that? Because I don't
Hmm.
know if I heard you exactly.
Okay.
I know what I think I heard, but I'm not sure if I heard you. And she repeated it. She said, I can't believe someone of your talent level is satisfied with a life where your artistic loves are out at the margins of your life, What would it be like to put it at the center of your life? And I said, oh my God, Mom.
That's what
She
you've
said,
been
what?
saying, Mom?
I said, you're just my biggest fan? You're
Why
not saying
hadn't
there's
you
something
heard
wrong
that,
with me?
Daniel? Why hadn't you heard that before?
Because the story I had about myself and about my mother didn't allow me to hear it. We
Mm.
only hear what our paradigm allows us to hear. The contexts we live inside of are invisible. I mean, this was the core teaching of this workshop I took, but I've found it to be very true. We live inside of invisible contexts and paradigms that we made up to survive. In a way, we made decisions about life as we go along, and this is very, very congruent with my dad's view of trauma. Right? Trauma is not what happens to us, it's what happens inside of us, and the things that happen inside of us are a fracturing of ourselves, so a diminishment, a constriction of our emotional repertoire, and B, a narrative framework about ourselves that explains and justifies that. So I'm not this, I'm that. I can't be that way. I have to be this way. The world doesn't want me this way. I have to adjust and adapt and cope. It is what it is. Oh, well. And then we get cynical and resigned. And so there was a dynamic between us where I associated her. And because, of course, my my hostile reactions would make her nervous. She was walking on eggshells, and when my mom walks on eggshells, she often actually says things that piss me off more because she's not being direct, right? So then I would use that as more evidence that she's just that she just doesn't approve of me. And of course, that's all tied to a belief about myself.
Right.
So we hear through filters that we're not aware are there.
Yes.
And they're born of trauma or emotional injury, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So, but the upshot of that was, in the immediate aftermath of realizing that my mom was just really cheerleading for me, and that it's cool to have a mother who cheerleads for you, like that's like, wow, awesome. It's total paradigm shift. In the next moment, I was like, of course I want to go to grad school for music and theater. I just don't know where or how. And I'm scared. And I'm scared to relive my undergrad. I don't want that to happen again. And I'm protecting myself. But cool, I'll look into it. I'll just look into
But
it.
you said those words to your mom.
Almost exactly.
Okay.
Almost exactly. And if not, I said them to myself in the coming days.
Yes.
And within 5 months of that, I had identified that I wanted to move to New York, identified that NYU was the school I wanted to look at, looked into their graduate programs, decided against music, against theater, but found out that there's a graduate musical theater writing program. And I'd never thought of myself as a musical theater guy, but it was so freaking obvious because I love both music and theater. So at the corner of Music Avenue and Theater Street, I should be able to set up shop and do something kind of cool.
Cool.
And I had found the program, I had applied, and I'd been accepted within 5 months of that conversation. So that's when it really clicked. I didn't know that I wanted that because I didn't allow my paradigm didn't allow me to know it.
Yes. Yes. Well, there's a hesitation when you're free and open to just say what interests you without judging yourself. I think it'll come out,
I think that's right.
Yeah. And I was going to say, from my own experience, trauma tends to fester cognitively, emotionally, and physically in your body.
I'm losing you again, Jana.
I said trauma tends to fester cognitively, emotionally, and physically in your body.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. And so that's the totalizing context through which you're perceiving life. So even if you have an intellectual knowledge that, well, probably it's not as bad as I think, in the moment, life is coming at you and it looks a certain way. You might as well be hallucinating. You can't unsee what you're seeing.
Right.
So what I do with mental chiropractic is related to that, in that I'm not dealing with the content of what people are struggling with. I'm trying to show them the context that they're looking at it through, which is giving them their entire experience. So I don't deal with big capital I issues. Someone comes to me with a particular thing that's stuck in their life right now. So I would have been a perfect candidate for mental chiropractic because I was stuck on my career. If I could have admitted that I'm stuck and said, I want to get unstuck, which I was even denying, I was like, no, I'm fine. But if I could have admitted that I was like sick and tired of it, then I could have, if I'd gone to someone like me, said, okay, well, what are my assumptions underneath this? What's my working theory? I would have had to first set an intention that goes above and beyond my current reality, and then ask, okay, what's in the way? And so it's like that. And that's a way of, if we can't loosen up the physical imprints of trauma, except over the long term, I mean, that takes a lot of work, right?
It does.
It takes somatic therapy or just life. But we can, I think, with enough intention, say, okay, at least let me see it differently.
Yes.
And if I can see it differently, then maybe my nervous system, my physical being, will get the memo that maybe it's okay to just like stand down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like just like stand down, red alert, and allow something to come in. And then things actually start to shift. So I consider it an inside out kind of healing, rather than going to the deepest layers of the trauma and asking why it's there. I just assume everyone's traumatized. I know I am. My new expression is I scream, you scream, we all scream. No, I scream, you scream. No, I'm traumatized, you're traumatized, we all scream for ice cream. That's it.
That's
And
cute.
yeah. And just to lighten the proceedings. But then, okay, since I'm all the patience in the world, what do you want to shift right now? Let's see if we can. Maybe you don't need to wait for some sweet hereafter of total 100% healing, which doesn't exist anyway, as far as I've seen,
Yes.
to start to shift your point of view. And maybe shifting your point of view in the present will help you start to reconcile with the past, bring the chasm a little less wide, so that you're looking at life through a more empowering and more objective lens.
Definitely. In the work you're doing with your dad, like I said, I saw the workshop in Rhinebeck. Has it brought you to a greater level of meaning, a closer bond with your dad? Do you feel like he definitely sees you in a different light now?
Yeah, and it's mutual. I see him in a different light too. And that's a function of both doing the workshop together, but also very much writing the book, Myth of Normal, which is his book. Let's be clear. He's the big font name on the
You're the
title.
little font.
It's with Daniel Maté. The next book will be both of us,
Okay.
And if we list our names alphabetically, then I'll go first.
Okay.
But this one was me really giving him a big assist, So that process of both stepping into my power and stepping out from behind the curtain as his, I used to be his editor, but now I'm his co-author. But at the same time, allowing him to shine and making sure that his message gets out there, I got to see a side of him I'd never seen before. The tortured artist, the insecure creator. I can relate to that. I found him a lot more relatable during this process than I ever had before. He wasn't so distant and defended and sure of himself. So collaborating on that was a very good scaffolding for updating our relationship, stepping into my power. And then, leading this workshop together, it brings us face to face with each other, as anyone who's watched those videos can see. Now, you watched the most recent one, which is fairly peaceful.
Yes.
There was a moment later in the weekend where I actually left the room. I was so upset with something he had done. And I did it very transparently. I said, I'm going to step off the stage now and let you handle things for 3 minutes. I have to go regulate myself. It wouldn't be responsible to be up here and pretending. But I didn't used to have it is great, but I didn't have to use to, if you go back and watch our first workshop, or at least the first talk we gave in 2016, it's all subtextual, but it's very, very easy for everyone to see. And if you look in the YouTube comments, like 400,000 people have watched it. And some people are like, oh my God, Daniel's such a spoiled brat. He's making it so difficult for his poor dad. His dad's a saint and he's just a jerk. Other people are like, oh my God, I never realized Gabor was such a narcissistic bully. Daniel's doing his best and he's totally blocking and rejecting. Other people see both of our humanity at the same time. Everyone looks through their own filter. But we didn't have an easy time of it. And the good thing was we didn't hold ourselves to some standard of perfection before we could get up there and do this, because I think we intuited rightly that just the doing of it, just the broaching of the conversation, the navigating of the territory, even if we don't know exactly what the treasure is or where it is, would be valuable in and of itself for us and for others, because it's the great underexplored topic.
Yes,
I agree. Lots of books on parenting kids, lots of books on grieving dead parents. What about all the decades in between?
Right. Well, I was going to say there's a lot of like mother-daughter books and relationships, but to see father-son and the intensity, at times between the two of you, what I was going to ask was, was, it sounds like when you said you got to see a side of your dad, so were there things like his own backstory or his relationship with his dad that you never knew about that came about? The way he was raised?
Yeah, not real. I would say that that's still a point of dissatisfaction for me.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't talk enough, to my satisfaction, about his childhood. Now, he tells the same story over and over again about his infancy. Anyone who's ever watched a Gabor Maté interview or read one of his books knows that he was an infant in wartime Hungary and was given to a Gentile stranger on the street by his Jewish mother because the Nazis were encroaching, and he nearly died of dysentery and all this kind of stuff. A very extreme story of deprivation and near death, right? But then he went on to have a whole childhood in Hungary and then a whole pubescence in Canada. And I know very little about all of that. And that has been a source of frustration for me, both because I think there's more to him than just this. I think there's more to all of us than just what happens to us in the first few months of life.
Yes.
I think our entire childhoods impact us in big ways.
Mm-hmm.
So on the theoretical pedagogical level, it doesn't quite satisfy me. I want to know more. I think we have to reckon with all the decisions we make about ourselves throughout. Now, of course, the earliest part of life is the template. That's when our brain is the most malleable and all that. But I feel like, and when I've asked him about it, I find that he deflects a bit. He just doesn't want to go there. He's not as interested in that in himself or others, but also just as his son. There's nothing he could have said to me at age 6 that would have helped me have a better infancy, but there are things he could have told me at age 6 that would have helped me deal with bullies better, or feel better about myself at age 12 when I was longing for girls that weren't returning the feelings, or even 18 when I was unsure what to do with myself. So that sense of his experience, his guidance being an unknown quantity to me, a kind of remote thing, that's and we all end up with certain kind of nutritional deficits from the parenting we receive. We have to supplant it from elsewhere. But that just was not one of his strengths.
Yeah.
And so I would love to, and his relationship with his father, I'd love to know more about. I asked him about it once on stage, and he gave an honest answer, a rather undetailed one.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew my grandparents as my grandparents. So I
Had
know
you
more
met-
about
You
I know
met
more
them?
about my mom's. Oh, yeah. I grew up with them.
Okay.
I grew up with all 4 of my grandparents within 5 blocks of my high school
Wow.
until 12th grade when my first grandparent died. And then the rest, my grandmother, my mom's mom, died in 2017 when I was 42. So,
Okay.
I've been relatively lucky on that front. And I know more about my mom's relationship with her parents than I do about my dad's with his.
Mm-hmm.
I think my dad took on a very adult role very young. So I don't know that he even, when he looks back on his childhood, thinks of himself much as a child. That's the
Maybe
sense
he
I
didn't
get.
feel like he had a childhood.
I think that might be very true.
Yeah.
So he might just not be able to relate on that level.
Yes. You said he was given to a Jewish family?
No. So he was born Jewish. His mother, my grandmother, had to give him to a non-Jewish stranger on the street to take to his Jewish relatives.
I see. So you went.
But this was a total stranger. She begged her to take my son, please, and then he didn't see his mother for 6 weeks.
Wow, traumatic. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Capital T traumatic.
Yes. Unbelievable. What else would you like people to know about you and the work you do? I mean, a lot of the focus on this show, Outside the Box, is mental health and well-being. So are there things that you do to take care of your mental health? I call it mental fitness.
Well, the mental chiropractic work that I do with other people, I guess, is an expression of what I try to do for myself. Of course, I can do it only imperfectly with myself because I'm me.
Mm-hmm.
So these days I've been seeing a therapist for a few years. I'm starting with a new therapist for a more sort of specialized line of inquiry into my emotional romantic relationships. That's an area of my life where I don't feel like I've really cracked the code. I was married and divorced and have had a whole lot of ups and downs in that area. So that's like For me, it's kind of the final frontier.
Yeah.
I have a nutritional coach right now, but she's not just about nutrition. We're looking at my sleep and my relationship to my own well-being, which is definitely,
Yeah.
I take a mood stabilizing medication that I've been on for the last 3 or 4 years. It's been extremely helpful. To my surprise, I wouldn't think a medication would really do the trick, but it does turn out there's a class of drugs for people with, sort of unstable mood disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't take these diagnoses very literally. Certainly they don't explain anything, but they do describe the big highs and big lows and never the twain shall meet dynamic of my adult life.
Yeah.
And somehow this medication seems to work. So those are all things I do. I take a lot of walks. And speaking of which, that's how I deliver the mental chiropractic work. So it's called Take a Walk with Daniel. It's at walkwithdaniel.com. And people walk where they are. So if you're in Orange County and I'm in Brooklyn, well, you go for a walk where you are. I go for a walk where I am. We put on our headsets, our phones, and we talk. And I've done it with people in Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Australia, France, Ireland, and all over North America and South America.
Great.
It's really cool. And those conversations are, what I call mental chiropractic. And that is totally a metaphor. And I know that chiropractic itself can be controversial in some circles, but I use it advisedly because I'm trying to make a quick, powerful, palpable adjustment in your mindset with your consent. Mm-hmm. You only come to me because you're sick and tired of being stuck on something in particular. And on some level, that it's not the circumstances that are keeping you stuck. It's your point of view, even if you don't want to admit that.
Mm-hmm.
But, you would really like an alternate perspective. So you may not have any choice in the circumstances, but if you could just have a choice in your outlook on it, that would be awesome.
Yes.
That's why people come to me. And when people come to me with that level of stakes, that level of motivation, that level of buy-in, that's a great place to start, because then I can get on board that intention and I can hold them accountable and I can be very frank and very straight. It is not a gentle conversation. It's often very, I wouldn't say it's a wrestling match, but I'm definitely sometimes trying to pin their minds to their old paradigm to the ground and be like, look, you're absurd.
Well, you're honest.
It's more than just honest. It's
blunt.
I'm committed. Yeah. I'm too committed to dick around. Pardon my expression.
Okay.
Because the person says to me at the beginning of the call, my intention for this walk is peace of mind, or my intention for this walk is freedom. Okay, well, damn it, I want that for you. So we're going to uncover everything that isn't that, everything that blocks that. And people really are great and then at that level, they're so tired of it being stuck that they're willing to go, okay, you win.
You win.
And then, of course, they have to go out into their lives and apply it. And I'm not saying that's a simple thing, but at least I'm giving them a moment, even just a moment of saying, okay, I've got some flexibility here. I'm not totally stuck.
Yes. No, I like that. My therapist taught me the word boundaries recently, mm-hmm. which has been incredible because I kept letting a lot of people and distractions come into my life when I was trying to focus on something, for example, and I wasn't saying no or give me a moment and it was just too much for me. It was overwhelming and I didn't know how to say, hey, I can't right now, come back in a couple hours, or you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, that's very important. And of course, if my dad was here, which he's not, he would now probably ask you if he could ask you about your childhood to try to get to the bottom of where you learned that saying no isn't cool, where you learned that you have to just say yes and placate and whatever, and what the cost has been in your life. I'm not going to do that, but it's, that's, there's always a reason why we have these inabilities. You weren't born not knowing how to say no. You weren't born suppressing your needs.
Right.
So we learn these things to survive along the way.
Yeah. And the other thing I learned too is sometimes toxic people, you really have to take a stance, and they could be people you're related to that are toxic in your life, but they can be so unhealthy for you. And that unhealthiness can show up in emotionally, physically, whatever it is. Yeah.
I think that's true. I mean, if we were in a mental chiropractic session, I might take issue with, there's nothing wrong with that language. And if it helps you identify who's good for me, who's not good for me right now, great. I'm all for it. When some of these terms, boundaries, toxicity, they become part of the pop psychology zeitgeist, and they can become a little imprecise. And I think that the only danger with that phrase is that it puts the toxicity over there with them as if they are a certain kind of person,
Mhm.
and they got a badge called toxic person.
Right.
But it's like gluten isn't toxic. It's
Right.
toxic to a celiac,
Yes.
and it's toxic to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how their immune system is doing at different times in their life. And a person who's extremely allergic at one time might grow out of that allergy.
Yes.
So in other words, there's a way of looking at it where it's just like, get them away from me. There's something wrong with them. I deserve better. And if that's what you need to do to make that boundary, then have at it. Another way of looking at it is, I traditionally have not known the difference between what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And right now, at my current level of sensitivity, what I need to do is to be really discerning. And there's something about this interaction that causes something in me that leaves a residue that's
Mhm.
just too much for me to deal with.
Yes.
And I currently don't know how to change the dynamic. So I'm going to step away from this dynamic. Now that's a less snappy, memeable way of saying
It's
it.
such a beautiful way of saying toxic.
Well, yeah. And I'm not trying to dress it up.
Sugar-coated.
Well,
No,
yeah,
no,
but I'm actually trying to,
no, it's a mature,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very well thought
Maybe
out, nicely.
a low glycemic sugar coated, because it actually places the agency with you. Like,
Mhm.
I am choosing not to ingest this right now. It's not good for me right now. It's not your fault. And it leaves room for me to alter and whatever.
Yes.
And maybe I won't. Maybe you're just not, maybe I just don't like you.
Yeah.
Like maybe I
Right.
just don't want you,
Yes.
which is fine, which doesn't mean you're toxic. It means
Yes.
I don't want to be around you.
Yes.
Period.
You
But
don't make me
again,
feel good.
well, I don't feel good around you.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
I don't feel good when you're around.
Mm, but
I mean,
you know, in the past, I would never say that.
we're kind of splitting hairs. And
No,
again, whatever works for you,
exactly.
I'm splitting hairs,
Yeah.
but I'm just trying to demonstrate that these little subtleties in how we language things
Mhm.
create the paradigm that we're looking through, and every paradigm has its own rules and its own limitations.
Right.
So I'm just kind of giving a demo, but you haven't told me that you're stuck with anything, so there's no point in me in nitpicking about your language. But I'm just, this is what I do with people, because if they're stuck and they're used to speaking about something a certain way, then when I point out to them, there's a whole set of hidden assumptions in what you're saying that I don't know if they're serving you. They go, oh, wow. Yeah. What if I just drop that and just,
yeah.
And then there's a simpler way of looking at it, and they find themselves more able to shift things.
Well, it's very peaceful and a healthy way of looking at it.
Maybe there's more peace. Maybe there's more peace of mind in it, but whatever it takes, whatever it takes.
So where can people find out more about you?
Well, I'm at walkwithdaniel.com.
Mhm.
And for anyone who is thinking, maybe this could be helpful, but I'm not sure, I offer free 15-minute consults for anyone who wants to ask me the questions. DanielMaté.com if you want to hear any of my musical theater stuff, which is a whole other world, but very core to who I am. And The Myth of Normal is out. It's this, as we speak, it's just popped back onto the New York Times bestseller list at number 10.
Congratulations.
7th week on the list, which is really cool.
Amazing.
So you can check that out. I have a YouTube channel called Lyrics to Go, where I nerd out about song lyrics, break them down, and I'm hoping to start a podcast with a friend of mine, a new friend of mine who people might know actually from pop culture, but I'm not going to say who it is because it's not official yet. But I'm pretty excited about that. So that would be about lyrics and songs and stuff like that. My dad and I are going to do a Hello Again podcast, hopefully next year. So, and then, if you want to find out about all of this, the big clearinghouse for all of this information is my social media. Instagram, Daniel B. Maté, Mate.
Okay.
Same thing with Twitter. So.
And are there any events coming up where people can tune in virtually or attend live with your dad?
I don't know that the upcoming event in Vancouver at the end of November is going to be live streamed at all. I mean, certainly
Okay.
the weekend won't be, because that's an intimate workshop with people. We do a
Okay.
Friday night event. We live streamed the one from Omega, like the one you mentioned.
Mhm.
I'm not sure, but we will put the video on YouTube if we can
Oh,
manage to
good.
get it recorded.
Okay.
And then, yeah, we'll hopefully be announcing new workshops next year in various locations. So these are getting more and more popular. So when we announce it, I recommend, if you want to make the trip, and keep in mind, this parent, adult, child stuff, you do not need to come together. You do not need to come with somebody else. You can come by yourself.
It's good to know.
You can be completely estranged and still benefit from this, because whether they're in your life or not, they're in your life.
That's very true. Very true. And what about you performing? Are you doing any events performing?
I don't have any concerts coming up. I don't do them very often, maybe once a year. I did one
Okay.
earlier this year in New York, but I do have one of my musicals called The Sweet Hereafter, which is based on a Russell Banks novel, is going to be semi-produced at a student an arts festival, a theater festival at an arts college in Philadelphia in the spring.
Okay.
So that's called the Polyphone Festival, and there'll be more details coming out about that in the new year, I'm sure.
Great.
That's in April. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on all you're doing. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise. So nice to meet you.